Markets were full, cities were growing, churches were packed. Nobody had any idea that the deadliest disaster in human history was already on its way. It started in Central Asia, moving silently along the Silk Road, the ancient trade route that connected the world. The merchants who carried goods across continents unknowingly carried something far more dangerous. In 1347, Genoese trading ships docked in Sicily. The sailors on board were dying or already dead, their bodies covered in mysterious black swellings oozing blood and pus. The port authorities ordered the ships to leave. It was already too late. The culprit was a bacterium called Yersinia pestis, carried by fleas, living on rats. And in medieval Europe, rats were everywhere. In the markets, the homes, the grain stores, the churches. The plague had the perfect delivery system. The symptoms were terrifying: fever, chills, and then the buboes. Enormous black swellings in the armpits, neck, and groin. Most victims were dead within 5 days. And in medieval Europe, nobody understood why. The doctors were helpless. They blamed bad air, planetary alignment, and the wrath of God. They tried herbs, bloodletting, and prayer. Nothing worked, because nobody in Europe had ever seen anything like this before, and nobody understood what was actually killing them. Towns shut down, doors were sealed, bodies piled up faster than they could be buried. Entire streets emptied overnight. The social fabric of medieval Europe, the markets, the churches, the communities, collapsed in a matter of weeks. The plague revealed who people really were. Priests fled their parishes. Doctors abandoned patients. Nobles locked themselves in castles. But ordinary people, farmers, women, neighbors, often stayed, caring for the dying even at the cost of their own lives. Between 1347 and 1351, the Black Death killed between 30 and 60% of Europe's entire population, somewhere between 25 and 50 million people. In 4 years, numbers so enormous, the human mind struggles to hold them. Fear always needs someone to blame. Jewish communities across Europe were falsely accused of poisoning wells and were massacred in their thousands. Pope Clement VI issued decrees declaring them innocent. Almost nobody listened. Plague and prejudice have always traveled together. The plague introduced Europe to a terrifying idea. Death comes for everyone equally. The king and the peasant, the bishop and the beggar. The Black Death made no distinction between rich and poor, and that realization quietly began to shake the foundations of medieval society. And here is where everything began to change. With half the workforce dead, the surviving peasants suddenly had something they had never had before: power. Lords who once commanded them now needed them desperately, and the peasants knew it. For the first time in centuries, ordinary people could demand better wages, better conditions, better treatment. The feudal system that had kept peasants in near slavery for generations began to crack. The Black Death did more for workers' rights than any revolution had managed. The church had told people that God protected the faithful. Then the faithful died in their millions. Priests died, bishops died, monks died. The institution that had controlled European thought for centuries suddenly had no answer to the most important question anyone was asking: why? The plague forced Europe to ask questions it had never been allowed to ask before. If the old answers were wrong about the plague, what else were they wrong about? That spirit of questioning, of looking at the world directly, was the seed of the Renaissance, an eventuality of science itself. With fewer people came fewer workers, fewer producers, and fewer goods. Prices rose. Surviving merchants became wealthy almost overnight. New banking systems emerged to handle the shifting wealth. The economic chaos of the plague accidentally created the conditions for early capitalism. Survival forced innovation. Cities began cleaning their streets, regulating waste, and quarantining the sick. The word quarantine itself comes from the Italian for 40 days. The period ships had to wait before docking. The Black Death invented public health. The artists who survived the plague painted differently. They showed real human suffering, real human joy, real human bodies. The plague reminded artists that humans were worth looking at. That shift from painting only for God to painting for humanity helped ignite the Renaissance. The medieval world that existed before the Black Death never came back. What emerged from the wreckage was different, more questioning, more mobile, more human. The plague that killed half of Europe accidentally cleared the ground for the modern world to grow. 50 million people died, and from that unimaginable loss, the modern world was born. Not because death is good, but because humans, when pushed to the very edge of survival, have always found a way to rebuild and to rebuild better. The Black Death did not just end lives, it ended an entire age and started another. Where we came from, what we survived, and how we got here. If you believe that story is worth telling, join us. Subscribe today, and let's walk through history together.